Hi, I'm Steve Schaefer, and this is another one of our videos on the Gospel of John. Today we're going to be looking at John chapter 2, verses 1 through 24. In this section of the Gospel, John narrates two scenes. The first is a wedding at Cana that take us from verse 1 through verse 12. And the second is Jesus' visit to Jerusalem during the first Passover visit recorded in the Gospel of John. Let's take a look at these each on their own. The first one is the wedding at Cana. In some ways, this is an interesting first sign because it's the sign where Jesus turns water to wine at a wedding. And we're left with several questions about why is this, first of all, in the Gospel of John? What does a wedding and wine have to do with the ministry of Jesus? And then again, why is it the first sign that John includes in his story about Jesus? Well, let's delve a little deeper. This section, the section that begins at chapter 2, verse 1, begins a series of stories that illustrate what John said in the opening chapter, that you would see greater things than these. And here we'll have a series of stories about these greater things. As we look at what's going on in chapter 2 all the way through chapter 5, we'll also notice that John continues to use this vocabulary that has dual meanings. Meanings that link the stories to greater and larger themes. Words like Jesus' hour, or faith, or glory, or signs. All of these are hooks that tell us that the story about Jesus has two layers to it. The first layer is what's actually going on in the story, the interaction of these characters. And the second is how we should understand this story from its meaning, from its theological importance. So we come to the story of a wedding at Cana. The story opens saying 3 days later, or on the third day. And that phrase, on the third day, can't help but be an echo of the fact that Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days. His resurrection occurs on the third day. And so right off the bat, we have sort of a subtle clue that there are some important meanings to the wedding at Cana. There's a funny interaction between Jesus and his mother in this story. And in it, Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come." Well, that phrase, "my hour," is one of John's favorite phrases, and it has a connection to Jesus' death and resurrection. In all of them, Jesus talks about his hour. And his hour is his greatest glorification, the moment of greatest glorification, which for John, the author, is his death and resurrection. Now, I should note that not all translations translate the word hour in Greek to hour in English. Sometimes they simply translate it as "my time has not yet come." But in all cases, it is the underlying word is hour. Well, in the interaction, the host of the wedding notices that they've run out of wine. And Jesus' mother says, basically, you should do something about it. So Jesus begins to do something, and the first thing he does is he notices that there are 6 large jars that contain 20 to 30 gallons each, made out of stone. And the description of these jars is pretty detailed, giving you some clue that these are symbolic jars. They're symbolic in a couple of ways. First of all, they are stone jars. And stone jars are different than clay jars because clay jars can become contaminated. John mentions that these are the kind of jars that they would hold water used for washing purification rites. And that's probably a reference to the fact that the Jews would wash their hands. They might wash their face as well before eating as a part of their adherence to a concern for purification following the law. So these jars have religious significance. But the fact that Jesus fills 6 jars which could have held as much as 30 gallons each, means that this miracle involves the production of 180 gallons of wine. And that's a lot of wine for a wedding feast. And so there is an abundance, there's a superfluence component to this miracle. But why wine and why a wedding? Well, weddings, free-flowing wine, are all symbols of the second coming. They're all symbols of the day that the Lord would arrive. They are all symbols of what the Jews looked forward to. There is a great wedding banquet. There is a large celebration. We can find this in Amos chapter 9 and Joel chapter 3, where there is the connection between a wedding celebration with free-flowing wine associated with God's reversal of the punishment that Israel received for their sin, for not following God. So what you notice here is that John is trying to tell us that the greater things that we will see in the ministry of Jesus involve the revelation of the fact that Jesus is the announcement and the embodiment of what has been promised in the Old Testament, what they looked forward to in terms of the day of the Lord, that he is ushering in the celebration banquet, the celebration with free-flowing, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land flowing with wine and celebration. Two other subtle things I want to point out. The first is that the miracle of turning water to wine is one of transformation. The water simply changes into wine. And associating this with Jesus' greatest hour, his death turns into resurrection. His physical body is transformed into a greater reality, a body which will never die, a body which is eternal. There's another interesting conversation in this wedding scene. It's when the servant goes to the bridegroom and says, "You have saved the best wine until now. You're not doing things the normal way." And this, I believe, is also symbolic of the fact that Jesus' ministry and his resurrection is better than the ordinary. It is better than the law of Moses. It replaces the ordinary, just like resurrection will replace death. He is saving the better until now. And so first came the ordinary, now comes the superior. And with that, there is a symbolic layer that says that since these jars are jars with religious significance, they are jars that contain the water for purification, they now contain the wine of celebration. The old ritual rites of purification that are practiced will be replaced by the resurrection of Jesus, the ushering in of the new era, the era of celebration that they've been looking for. So the old vessels of purification are now filled with the new wine of celebration. It's new wine in old jars, sort of like new wine in old wineskins.